2002. We were all reasonably involved in fandom back then. What was the state of fandom back then before the TV series came back? Do you remember, Todd?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been involved with organising Doctor Who conventions, as you know, here in Australia for the previous 7 or 8 years, and I've been involved with the Doctor Who Club, and throughout the 90s into the early 2000s, like, you know, the numbers began to dwindle, you know, in the club. You could see, you know, from the mid-90s, like halving of the numbers of people that was sort of involved coming to events and that sort of thing. I mean, even with the audios, you know, there was interest there. You know, I certainly felt that there was a group of people willing to support those, certainly after the book sort of series sort of also sort of, I think, died down. So it was just very different to what it is now. I mean, Doctor Who was just, well, as you know, Dwayne, like it was a niche thing that was slowly disappearing, you know, into the memories of people our age who grew up with it, you know, on the ABC. I mean, would that be a fair assessment, Philip?
Well, I mean, you say that, but you were running conventions that were getting hundreds of people along, attracting great guests, and yet nothing like that's been run. And that's not because of COVID. Australia's not successfully run anything to that scale for a long, long time now.
Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, Dwayne, we were still getting hundreds of people, but I mean, I look at the difference between the first convention I was involved with, which was in 1993 with Mary Tam, and we got, you know, over 350 people to that convention, and with Elizabeth Sladen at the end of 96, I mean, we still got, you know, 250 plus, but by, you know, the numbers were certainly around, you know, 200 or so, like in that early 2000s. Like there was just little dips. It was just people were beginning to, I just feel, drift away. We were certainly getting a lot of people, that's for certain, but I guess when you look at it from a convention perspective, you could see, you know, the change in numbers, and we certainly had to work a lot harder to get people along. But still, this is all very much pre-social media, sort of all these big conventions now, you know, that are such a military operation where people, you know, it's autograph, it's photograph, that's all that they want. And certainly at that time, it was more about, you know, coming along and meeting the people and hearing the stories, which now, of course, you can get on the DVD extras, etc., and that sort of thing. It was you know, the state of fandom, like the fans were there, but there wasn't really anybody new to renew, if I can say that. When people sort of left or drifted away, there weren't new people coming in.
It was interesting because I'd been very big into Doctor Who when I was younger, and had been involved with the Doctor Who Club a bit sort of in my high school years, and I'd sort of faded away for a while. It was actually the late 90s when I started getting back excited again. So I sort of came back as everyone else was leaving. So the next 10 or so years were for me actually quite a influential time and a positive time in terms of getting into fandom, meeting people, and having the sort of discussions I just love to have. I guess this is what podcasts do now, isn't it? We've taken the podcast now is the discussion that we used to have around the dining table after a convention, or, you know, around the bar. So it's sort of the conversation has moved locations. But yeah, it was certainly a different time. But the people who were, you know, enthusiastic and keen, and all sorts. I mean, that was part of the joy of the club, wasn't it? That you're never quite sure what you're going to get out of the people who turn up, and it's the range of beliefs, understandings, and careers, and everything. It was just this huge mix of people, but all with a common love. I do think the Big Finish stories made an impact, and certainly for the club in terms of selling them. It was a very big thing when they first came out. So suddenly they had something which was real Doctor Who, which I don't think the books ever quite. I mean, I know people love the books, and there's lots of people who adore the books and read them all and bought them all. But I think the audio has brought something new because it was actually the actors performing. And I think getting the actors back was impressive. And then when Paul McGann came back, then you actually had new seasons. And particularly the first 3 or 4 seasons of McGann felt like real Doctor Who seasons because they came out every month, one after the other. They weren't split up. And for me, that was really new Doctor Who coming out. What did you think, Dwayne?
Just in terms of the difference between fan gatherings back then and now podcasts, I think podcasts and internet are sort of been a bit more divisive. So if people sort of are attracted to certain personalities on podcasts, they'll go over there at that group and they'll just stick with that group or the other. Whereas with the old fan gatherings, that was people of all different types, all together. We're all mixing together, and it's a bit of a shame that we don't have that so much anymore. That's one thing that I miss. We could sit on the taverns in Sydney, we'd have 30 of us sitting in a long table of every kind of background and belief and persuasion, all sitting around talking about what we loved, and we just don't get that anymore.
I totally agree with you, totally 100%. I think, leading up to the change of the century, the influence of the internet hadn't really hit. And, the newsletter was still there, those physical day events and those gatherings that you talked about. It was very different. I mean, obviously, most of my experiences are through the 1990s, and so many friends I made in the early 90s, and they're still friends today, and into the early 2000s. I guess part of my thing is that towards the end of that time, I guess I was getting a bit tired, with running things. I'd been president of the Doctor Who Club. I'd been doing the convention. So perhaps not in 2002. We'd come off two really great, I think, conventions with Sylvester McCoy and Annika Wills Sylvester McCoy and Nicola Bryant, and then Colin Baker and Annika Wills and Katie. And so in those sort of terms, keeping fandom alive and keeping, events which we were amateurs. Like, we weren't incorporated, we weren't these big organizations, we were doing it on a minuscule budget. But I do think there was a heart there that today I got a message from somebody who sent me a picture from one of the conventions where I had organized a birthday cake because it was her birthday during one of the night events. And then she sent me a picture of me with a Dalek wearing a Colin Baker costume, which I hadn't seen in 25 years. It's those things that I think were quite amazing about fandom at that time. And I think looking back on it, it was just a special time because it was sort of a smaller group. It was us, whereas now New Who is fantastic. It's opened up so many opportunities, but at the same time, fandom is a very different place.